All cultures have their ghost stories. Cape Cod is no exception. The Cape's early history as a haven for pirates makes for a wealth of folklore. Of course, not all ghost stories are about pirates. The following tales are told by the good people of Wellfleet, a small storybook town on the outer Cape. Things that go bump in the night. Fact or fiction? You be the judge.
Thanks for having us over, Carol, so we could talk to you about what had happened here in this house. I wonder if you could tell us about the presence that you felt here.
Okay, well, I moved here about 6 years ago, and before I moved in, the landlord's son told me that he had felt weird in the bedroom that he stayed in, which was my daughter's bedroom. And when I moved in, I put my bed into a cubby hole where it just fit, and I thought that would be a good place to sleep. But when I tried to sleep there, I felt a presence that was very, very heavy, and I don't know. I'm usually a very restful sleeper, and there was something there that didn't want me to be in that particular corner. So I moved my bed to another position in the bedroom, and that was more comfortable, that this presence was still there. And it felt like a woman to me, and she wasn't frightening. At night she was frightening. During the day it was okay.
Could you tell us anything that you've heard about the history of this house or the history of a ghost here?
Yes, my friend Howard Snow, before he died, used to come and visit, and he said that this house had been located where the Cumberland Farms now is, and that his grandmother had lived in this house for many, many years, and the kitchen that we're now in is part of the original house. And he felt that his grandmother was very attached to this house and might have wanted to stick around after she died. But once in a while I hear somebody walking around, and it sounds like somebody's moving furniture in the middle of the night.
The house was never lived in. And then finally, from me, with my gift of gab, I persuaded Annie to let me live here.
It sounds like it didn't turn out too bad.
And I think at that time we rented the house for like $150 a month.
Yeah, those were the days.
Those were the days. She had lived here with her mother, and when her mother died, she was afraid, or she had heard things, so she moved out of the house and moved down into the telegraph shack, which was just a shack. And finally, about 3 months, I worked on her and finally got her to agree to rent the place to my brother and I. So I think it was like in June of 75 or 76 that we wound up moving into the place. And we came into the place, and it was like Annie had just lived there yesterday. I mean, there was still clothes on the bed, there was dishes in the sink, there was food in the refrigerator that had been in there for 5 years. That's how this house was. And the place was so full of stuff, so cluttered with stuff, that we had to spend the first 3 weeks like camped out on the living room floor, because we had to clean out all the bedrooms and stuff like that. And one thing that Annie had made very clear that she didn't want us to, she kept her the front room locked, that was a bedroom that she had a bunch of stuff in, and she told us we couldn't go up in the attic, and that was locked too. So we lived in this house for 3 years before I ever went into the attic. But anyway, getting back to it, the first 3 weeks, I remember the first 3 weeks of living in this house was where the most strange stuff happened. It was like there was new people here, and whatever was in here wanted to see what we were like or whatever, but after 3 weeks, it never really bothered. And I lived in this house for 5 years, and after the first 3 weeks, I never was bothered. But in the first 3 weeks, there was all kinds of stuff going on, like doors opening and closing all the time, and you'd make sure they're latched, and they'd open. You'd make sure they're latched again, they'd open again, or they'd just close with no wind, nothing, And another thing was you'd be trying to sleep, and you'd hear like somebody walking around up in the attic and like dragging a chair. You know how the noise is when you're dragging a chair, like a all the way across. And, we thought maybe it was animals or something, but I mean, it was like clump, clump, clump of footsteps up there. And my brother and I heard this quite a few times. And we never went, we weren't allowed to go up there because she had told us not to go up there. Finally, after 3 years, my curiosity was so great that I did finally go up in the attic. And what I saw up there, it doesn't explain this at all because it was so cluttered and packed with stuff up there. There's no way anything could have moved, because the noise that it made was almost like it was totally empty up there.
The only thing that I knew when I was a youngster is about the haunted house that we had up in South Wellfleet that was alongside of Route 6, where the Wellfleet Motel is built now. There was a house that had been boarded up for many, many years. I never did know who ever lived there. It could have been, let's see, who was the name of the, well, I can't think of the name of the man now that had that field through there. But anyway, we used to go and when we were youngsters running around chasing the girls in Orleans and like that, we used to bring them down there in the nighttime, and pack in there, knowing that we called it the old haunted house because that was all that I ever knew it about as a youngster. Where it was all boarded up, and never did. It was back in the trees where you could hardly ever see it from the road. You had to drive in there. It was an old lot with some old willow trees that I remember growing in the backyard of it. And we would just go in there and kind of torment the girls, more or less to get them to sit closer to you, than anything. I don't think we ever had any scares as far as being a haunted house. I haven't lived in an old house, you used to hear the creaks and the moans, from an old home because in a bad storm, windstorm, you could hear them creak and doors would unlatch, and this is what makes you believe there's ghosts around because the buildings would unlatch the doors.
My experience with a ghost is when I was doing census work a couple of years ago, and I went up this, it was a rainy, cold, wet, dark March day, and I went up this hill. It was a very old road, one of those ones where they have double tracks made out of cement blocks, and the cement blocks were cracked and sort of falling one side and another, and it was a very steep hill, and I wasn't sure if the car could get up at night, but I went ahead and tried because I had no inclination to walk up a cold, wet hill. I had to check out what was on that road, so I went up all the way to the top, and there were 3 buildings, and up at the top there was one that was obviously empty, and so I started back down again, and on the way up I had seen the one on the left looked like a garage, and so I didn't expect anything there, but when I came back down, I stopped the car right opposite it and looked through. There was a window on the upper story, and it was quite a big window, and had window, it's little individual panes in it, I remember, and there was a window in the far side of the building, and in between, in silhouette, I saw a man, or at least I thought, I guess by size, a man standing at an easel, and I remember the white oak canvas, and his hand was going like this, and I thought I saw him painting like black marks or whatever, and I said, oh, somebody is in there, because I really hadn't expected anybody. So it was a very steep hill, so I went down a little ways to park the car on someplace that was slightly level, and walked back up again, and knocked on the door, and there was no answer. And as I was knocking, I realized that there was sort of like a chink in the door, and I thought, oh, it's going to be really cold in there, I would think, for this time of year. This door isn't insulated. So I sort of stood to the side and looked in the window, and there was nothing in there. When I checked about the place, some very vague things I got were that the owner was dead, and the other thing was that there's some story that years ago there had been a painter living on the other side of the road, and he used to disappear from his family and go off painting.
I was in the kitchen, and I heard the front door distinctly open and close, and I called out, "Hey, Jerry, I'm in here in the kitchen." Nothing happened. So I walked out to the front door, and I looked around, and I didn't see anybody. I looked upstairs, I didn't see anyone. I opened the door and closed it, and yeah, that was the right sound. I looked around, no car. That was strange. So I went back into the kitchen, and I was cleaning, and I heard footsteps walk across the floor above me. Now, upstairs was a roomlet. It was really like a landing that had some chairs and some bookcases on it. Well, I just ran out of the house as fast as I could possibly go. Halfway across, I felt like silly, but it scared me, and I wasn't going to be in there with nothing, making footsteps. And I went across the street and asked the neighbor, could I use the phone, and told him what was happening, and tried real hard not to look like an idiot. Called the Wellfleet police, and they came out very quickly. Of course, this was fall. There weren't any tourists left. And they came out, and they checked the upstairs and the downstairs and the crawl space and looked everywhere, and then there was no person. And I did look like a fool, and I was in the kitchen with them. And they said sometimes that people break into empty houses and that someone could have been there and not knowing I was there cleaning it. And I said, well, aren't you glad this is not a dangerous call, or you didn't have to arrest anybody or anything like that? And he, he. And the footsteps go across the ceiling again. Now those cops pulled out their guns and shot out here like this and went upstairs, and nothing. Absolutely, totally nothing. Well, at least I wasn't an idiot. We decided it really was something, a ghost maybe, and I decided that they could go away and I could stay there and finish the house. So I did. I only heard it once more. It made me uncomfortable, but I was determined to finish the house and complete my contract, and I did.
Did you ever go back into that house again?
Never. I've driven by it, and I do think about ghosts every time I drive by.
I've only had one experience with ghosts in this house. About 15 years ago, when I first bought the house, I was over here working alone, and I was working in the front room, and I sat down in the hallway to take a break and have a cup of coffee. I was at a cigarette, and I was smoking at the time, and I was just sitting there looking at the detail of the hallway, and I felt that someone was behind me. And I didn't get frightened, but I just felt the presence of something or someone. And I turned around, I didn't see anything. And I went back to work, and worked for an hour or so. And I went back and sat down again, and tried to feel this, sense this thing that feeling I had, and I couldn't, so I just sat there and I was having another cigarette, and then it came again. And I turned around and it was gone. Oh, the feeling was gone. I didn't see anything. So. As far as ghosts go, it didn't frighten me, but I don't believe in ghosts. I mean, we talked about this earlier. I'd like to believe in ghosts. I lost a daughter in this house, and I'd like nothing better than to know that her ghost is here and that I could, someday I may be able to see her. So.
Here to tell you a little bit about a house built in 1710 in North Truro on Highland Road. I lived there in 1973 through 1975, early 76, and it was supposedly we had heard stories that a woman who was years ago, her name is Madeline Winslow, was the daughter of a sea captain, and she was a chiropractor and a spiritualist, and she was just supposedly still around. And we sort of took this with a grain of salt until one evening we were sitting in the music, what we had was a music room, and we all sort of looked at each other, and there was a whiff of flowers that sort of swooped through the room, and we, puzzled, didn't know much about it, but sort of all said, gee, that must be Madeline Winslow. Is she here, or whatever, you know. And spoke with a gentleman the next day who had owned the house and then had sold the house, but when he did own it, he told us he knew Madeline Winslow, and he told us about her, and he also said that she was known for her love of flowers, and she had flowers there were tons of things growing around. The landscaping was incredible around the house. And she had a violet scent that she wore all the time. And
when we first moved into this house, we used to smell perfume in my room. And we used to like smell all different kinds of smells and stuff, but no one really knew what it was.
When someone approaches you to do some work about ghosts, what are they usually feeling? What goes through their mind when they have this encounter? And then what do you need to do with them?
Mm-hmm. Usually, you know, it's one of the most curious questions that people ask me. If I say I'm clairvoyant medium, the first thing most of them want to know is about ghosts. Often people will call and they're being disturbed. There's some disturbance in the house, a sound in the night or a certain particular time of evening. I call those the rattlers. Are they rattlers? You can hear banging, thumping. You can hear sounds. Some of them have events happen, like over and over, a particular item will get moved in their house, and they'll keep saying, well, is there a ghost here? Being woken in the night, those kinds of things. They're mostly, often people are frightened. And I assure them that this is safe. There is nothing to be frightened, but they are obviously looking for the attention to perhaps be released from the house. And from that point, I first go in on the first part of the contract and see if I'll take the house. I do not and will not work in houses that are demonic, and there are demonic houses here on the Cape, and I've refused to do that kind of work. It's a whole other level of the spirits. But the people at the house, if I take the contract, I see and feel the energy. We get 90% of the impressions psychically from the outside of the house. And then I go in with a team after. And what we basically do is investigate. come together. I encourage people to feel if there's any vertigo in certain areas, or to sort of let themselves flash back in their image that this is 300 years ago or 200 years ago, or maybe that before the house was actually there, what was there on the land, what was going on here in this place. And with that, everyone goes around in silence with notebooks, and we come together later in a common room, and out of maybe say 20 people, 15 will have the same response in the same areas of the house.
It was about 10 or 12 years ago that I built a house and a studio on Newcomb Hill. The studio was built first, and we were adding on the house as an afterthought, more or less. And in the course of that, we spent nights sleeping in the studio, which was had a hexagonal shape and a home roof. We'd sleep upstairs. One night was a fairly calm, nice moonlit night. We had the mattress on the floor, and we'd gone to sleep. Everything was pretty normal. And middle of the night, out of the blue, Sharon was sleeping next to me. She sat up screaming, which of course woke me up with a real start. And the cat was sleeping next to us, and it lit right out of the room and went downstairs and proceeded to make weird meowing noises for a while. Sharon had absolutely no idea why she sat up and was screaming. So we sort of put that behind us and went back to sleep. The next day, Sharon went to work. She used to work at Sweet Seasons as a waitress. And there was either a psychic or some sort of medium at the restaurant as a customer. Sharon waited on this lady, and the lady looked up at her and said, "You've had a visitor." At which point Sharon was taken aback, told her the story, and in doing so she mentioned that the studio had a hexagonal shape, which this lady thought was very interesting and said it was a fairly powerful shape. Told me about it, at which point I sort of started thinking more in terms of this being a happening of some kind. And over the course of, well, the last 6 or 7 years, there have been a number of instances of the same thing happening in that studio, and it's by people who don't know each other. People waking up screaming in the middle of the night and not knowing why.
Hi, Ruben.
How you doing?
I understand you have a story about a ghost here in Wellfleet.
Somewhat. I live on Baker Avenue in a very large house. And as I was growing up, I always was told ghost stories about ghosts being in the house and different things happening. You know, house was rented out a lot to a lot of different people who would come and rent an apartment. And on occasions they would see faces in the mirror and things like that. And as I was a little kid, I always believed all little stories, you know, Big Brother would tease you and stuff. So I usually, whenever I hear an odd noise in the house, I usually pay attention to it. And probably about maybe 4 months ago, 4 or 5 months ago, I had moved out of the house for a little while, and I just came back.
and I usually fall asleep watching TV or whatever, and I was watching a particular movie, and what happened was that I fell asleep, and I woke up, I don't know, about 4 or 5 hours later, and the movie had been started up, had been playing again, and the volume had been turned up a lot. I mean, enough so that it woke me up. And so I got up, and as I started walking towards my stereo, the movie stopped playing, started rewinding, and the TV shut itself off. So I just kind of stopped and looked at it. So I shut the rest of the stereo off, climbed back in bed, and tried to ignore what was going on because I'm not too fond of having things in my room that I don't quite know about. So I basically tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. But I don't know why the VCR stopped playing and the TV shut itself off. And the volume was turned up quite a bit, so it was almost up all the way because it was more than enough to wake me up.
And then nothing else happened for the rest of the evening?
No, I tried to ignore everything else that I heard.
You kept hearing things, though?
Just every once in a while, you hear footsteps up in the attic, like someone's walking, pacing back and forth up in the attic. Ignore it. I try to.
Were there any incidents when you were growing up?
Not really, not that I remember. I don't remember any. I've heard a lot of stories of tenants that have been in the apartments and have had encounters.
Tony Costello, and he was telling you about his wife had been there. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I know she stayed in the house. I don't remember anything particular about what happened to her. Not really. I know a cousin of mine, before my father got married, they were staying in the house taking care of it. And one evening, she was lying in bed, and I guess my cousin, who was just a little baby, was in another room. It was during a pretty bad, thunder and lightning storm, and she woke up to find that all the covers on her bed had been pulled off onto the floor, totally over the end of the bed and onto the floor. And she didn't think anything of it. She pulled the covers back up and went back to sleep. A little while later, she woke up and the covers were on the floor again. And so she thought, she'd go check on the baby. So she went and looked on the baby. It's fine. And so she went back to bed, and a little while later, the covers were pulled off again. So she was a little nervous, so she went and got him out of his crib and carried him back into her room. And just by the time she got back to her room, she heard a loud bang, a lot of glass breaking. And she went back into the baby's room, and I guess some branch or something blew off a tree and crashed through the window. And most of the glass landed in the crib where the baby was. So she just went back to bed.
Does your family have any sense of who the ghost is the spirit of?
We think it's some relative, one of the relatives that stayed in the house at one point during when my great-grandfather was, staying in the house. We're not exactly sure who it was, but we know she's some sort of relation to us. Then she stayed at the house at one time or another. But it seems that she's real protective of young kids.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is there some story about a fire there? I have a vague recollection of your dad saying something about a ghost warning about a fire?
Um,
Doesn't ring a bell?
that's possible. I don't really remember anything about a fire.
Is this ghost frightening at all? Or?
No, she's real friendly. More or less playful. I would, likes to turn TVs on and turn TVs off just to let you know that she's still there and she's around. But she isn't, nothing bad.
Well, thank you very much for coming and telling us your story.
It's no problem.
Thank you.
Jean said that, and it's a theory, that probably when there was a male heir that came to the house, that the ghost was not as active as it had been before. But she says on at least one, and I'm not sure whether it's two, but my memory sort of tells me it was twice, that she felt that she was pushed to a certain area of the house, and that when she got there she found fire. Small fires, I don't know, electric light socket or something like that, with smoke coming out of it. And she felt that she was sent there by the ghost to put the fire out, protect the house.
My sister and I had gone to the river. While we were at the river, very far apart from each other, we both had feelings of my father coming to us and saying, it's almost time to get back. Here are some things I'm going to help you with in the rest of your life. And Sheila and I came back together and said, it's time for us to go. We left. We walked in the door. As soon as we walked in the door, we heard my mother yell, angels take care of my husband. And he died. And I think we got there right at that right moment. We both knew to get there when that happened. He seemed to linger, very much his presence very strong there for a little while. He had even told the people from the crematorium what time to come get him. So none of us had to do anything. And I would say for 40 days he was very present and could be called upon to really communicate with in a very strong way. And then it seemed to dissipate. But when my mother died, he seemed to be very present again. Now, one other thing that happened while he was dying was I have a niece who's blind. And, my father was in bed and she said, who is that woman over in the corner? And she described my grandmother, who was my mother's mother, but she was very close to my father. And, I could see her there too, but I didn't feel like that was a ghost. I don't know why, but it doesn't feel ghostly to me that someone's strong spiritual connections would return to them at that kind of moment. I don't know, it felt okay.
But you felt a presence of
a very strong presence of her, and this little girl who was blind could describe physically what she looked like perfectly, even though she had died 30 years ago. Some of that may have been that he was strong and clear. He was so intact and so in charge of what he was doing. He determined when he would stop treatment and allow this process to take place. So that may have had something to do with it. But I have had moments, even after those 40 days, when I had a very difficult time last summer. And I remember driving down Route 6 thinking, I just can't go another inch. And I could feel his hand on my shoulder saying, it's okay, keep going.
I think that we in our society should really appreciate or to think more about people who have died, and to feel their presence more, to appreciate them more, to celebrate them more. I think we turn it off at death, which is a shame. And the Mexicans, carry this on. The Chinese carry this on. And we don't, and I think it's a shame.
I was reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead not too long before my father died, maybe about a year, and they have something in there that for the first 40 days the soul has to go through an evolutionary process. But at the end of that 40 days, you can call upon that soul by going outside, clapping your hands 3 times very loudly and calling their name. So at the 40-day point, I was back in Massachusetts, and I was at the beach in Revere.
Right.
And I thought, well, I'm going to try this. It's been 40 days, and I'm going to call him back. So I clapped my hands 3 times and called his name. Well, his name was Tom Collins. And so these people that I guess were underneath the boardwalk there were, rose up. Sounded like I was calling for a drink.
Some ghosts have been reported as red orbs of light. Others have been seen as shadowy or translucent figures. Still others have appeared as fully visible, human-like apparitions. Ghosts have been described as helpful, playful, or downright menacing. No matter the demeanor of the apparition, a ghost sighting can instill fear in the most doubtful of skeptics.
Hi, Carol. Thanks for inviting us over to talk to us about the spirit presence you felt in this house.
Sure.
If you could tell us what's happened.
Well, what happened was sometime last summer, around the end of the summer, I started waking up in the middle of the night, which is very unusual for me. And when I woke up, I would see this redness in my apartment. And sometimes it would have a shape, and my bed was over there, and I might see it up in that corner, or I might see it quite close to me, and this started happening pretty often, and it finally got to the point that if I woke up in the middle of the night, I knew that if I opened my eyes, I would see this thing. And it really started to get on my nerves. You know? And it didn't look like anything. You know, you couldn't say it looked like a person, or it looked like a particular anything, but it was something that did move around in the apartment, and that did, you know, I felt like intentionally awaken me, or when it was present, I would indeed wake up. And I only ever saw it after I'd fallen asleep. I never saw it, you know, as I was going to sleep, or in the morning as I was waking.
So was it just over the summer, or has it continued?
Well, it continued for a while into the fall, and I was working at the time, and I talked to people I work with about it, and people said, well, why didn't I talk to it, and why didn't I get up and touch it? And I thought, you try lying in bed and seeing something like this and see if you would get up and do anything. And eventually I became so annoyed by it that I was looking in the paper one day, and I saw that there was a psychic fair up in Hyannis. So I went to the psychic fair and went to the desk and told the person at the desk that I had this presence that I wanted to get rid of. And I asked her advice on which psychic who was there I might see. So she directed me to this particular psychic, and I told her about the phenomenon that I saw in my apartment. And one time, I think what happened that was really kind of shook me up was I woke up one night and I was like facing the wall, and as I opened my eyes, there was this big redness right in front of my face, and then it got very small very quickly and just dropped down between the bed and the wall. So that was too close for comfort. But when I told this woman about that, she said that that was because it didn't want to frighten me, that it shrank and got very small. And her feeling was that it was the spirit of someone who had died, who had not gone on, had not really left this life, had not really made the transition onto the other side of life. And she felt that it was very attracted to me because I was very spiritual, and that it had me mixed up with the white light of God, and that that's why it was coming to me. And then she gave me a meditation to do to help this critter onto the other side.
And then you did that?
Yeah, I did do that. I did that, and it worked immediately. I did it like a couple times, and it was a really simple thing where what I was to do when I saw it was to visualize a light at the end of a tunnel and to take this red thing by the hand and guide it down the tunnel and sort of direct it on to the other side, but with me leaving before I got to the end of the tunnel.
I thought that ghosts were probably real, but I wasn't sure. But once my dad told me he saw a ghost, I was really amazed.
My wife and I were in bed reading, sitting up reading, and the room went very cold for me, extremely cold, and coming right through the doorway were 5 balls of light, about the size, the largest one was the size of, say, a softball or a grapefruit. And these balls of light, I mean, I just went freezing, just frigid cold. And these balls of light came in the door and went, whew, you know, not maybe in that curlicue, but with strong energies very quickly once I glanced them, and one pierced right through me. And immediately I went to Shelley, did you feel that? Did you see that? Feel what? See what? I said, George was just here, George Price. And we found out that George Price had passed away in Hawaii, the state of Hawaii. And I felt that George had come to see me to say goodbye. But one of those energies, one of those balls of light said to me that was George Price. Just went whoom, right, you know, shocked me, went through me, and shudder cold, just icy, icy cold. But that was George.
The Christmas tree was just a little bit to the right of where it is right now, over there in between the space between the picture window and the sliders. It was nighttime. My bedroom used to be in there. And Tim and I were getting ready to go to sleep. And I was laying facing out into the living room. The bed was low to the ground, and I was laying facing out of the bedroom into the living room. The house was dark, and I noticed 3 columnar-shaped lights in front of the Christmas tree. About the length of my finger, about the same width, like a pale green and a pale blue, in 3 different places. And I kind of looked at it. I mean, I thought it must have to do with the lights on the Christmas tree. But the lights on the Christmas tree were out because we turned them out to go to sleep. And I looked at them for a couple of minutes, and they moved just a little bit. They moved in the tree, a little up, a little down. So I shook Tim and said, "Do you see that?" He saw them too. And we both lay there and looked at him for a few minutes, thought we saw another one out the window behind the tree, but because the house was dark, it was hard to tell just what was where. So we got up and came out here into the living room and looked out the picture window, and I don't know if this had anything to do with it, but it happened to be a night where there were shooting stars like I have never seen before. Shooting stars coming down from the top of the heavens down to the horizon, just like one after the next after the next. We must have stood there at the sliders watching the shooting stars for, 15 or 20 minutes. At that point, I pulled the plug on the Christmas tree lights. They'd been out before, but then I pulled the plug on the lights. We went and we got back in bed. We started to go to sleep again. Bang, there's the 3 lights, except now there's a couple of other ones, and they're moving a little bit. So we lay there watching them, not knowing what to make of it. At one point, there was one just for like a fraction of a second at the foot of the bed, just there and then not there. So fast that you had to even wonder if you really saw it or not, but we both saw it. They were there until we fell asleep.
Sally, we've heard that a number of years back there were some stories about a ghost here in this house.
Yes, I've been told that there are ghosts here. One ghost, as a matter of fact. It's a little girl that lived here, and she died of scarlet fever and has always been in this house ever since. though she apparently lives upstairs primarily and comes down and visits people once in a while, though she's never visited me. But she visited my partner, Lizzie Upham, quite frequently, came downstairs and stood beside her bed. I don't think I have the right vibes for a ghost, but there are other people who have seen her, and she wears a red dress primarily, and little Mary Jane black shoes. So I was told. Perhaps one day I'll be privileged to see her. That's really all I know about her. She's pretty quiet most of the time, and I think she's about 8 or 9, something like that. She's quite a youngster. I don't know, do ghosts grow up, or did they stay the same age?
From anything I've heard, I think they stay the same age.
Uh-huh. Well, I guess this one does. And she apparently appears mostly at night, when a child should be in bed. Perhaps. Child ghosts have the privilege of staying up at night.
And my ghost story is from West Barnstable, where my brother lived in a nice old barn that was converted into a house. And I saw the ghost twice. And he appeared to be sort of just living in the loft area of the barn. Randy and his roommate saw him all the time, but I was only there for twice. And one time I just sort of saw him go by at the top of the stairs to my left. It was just like seeing a person go by, but then you realized there was no detail to the person. It was just a form. And then the other time that I saw the ghost was when I went up to the loft where the bedrooms were, and I was standing in the closet doorway with an armful of albums, choosing an album to put on. And all of a sudden I felt like a cold gray cloud was pushing on me, and I felt like screaming, but I decided that would be kind of stupid, that all I really needed to do was move out of the way, because I was in someone's way. So I just stepped out of the closet and stepped back and felt this cold, damp presence just go by me like I had been rude, and would I please just move? So I moved, and that's all it took. And he went sort of sailing around the corner to the next bedroom. And I realized I'd seen a ghost. It felt like it. That's pretty much the story.
We've had some experiences with ghosts together and in different situations. One incident, we were home alone, and my parents were at a party, and we were just sitting on my bed playing the Ouija board. And we were like asking all these questions, and all of a sudden we saw this figure walk by my room. And were you scared, Tara?
Yeah, sort of. It was just like a shadow. It wasn't really a figure, because, I mean, we were just sitting on the bed. We knew where our shadows were, and then we saw a different shadow just like go by the wall.
It was really weird. And another time we were sitting on the sofa, and we just were just watching movies and watching TV, and all of a sudden we just saw this shadow walk by, and like we both saw it, so we like knew it wasn't just us. And like just whenever we're home and stuff, sometimes we always hear like noises, and like there's always shadows and stuff.
I have been like in the study alone sometimes, and I'm sort of scared because I know there is a ghost. But then today Molly was explaining to me it's a friendly ghost, it's not going to do anything. I mean, it is part of our family and everything, so.
My first experience was in 1974, I believe. My first evening in a house that I had rented in Truro. It was a captain's house, and I rented it with 2 other roommates. And the very first night, or actually the morning of that night, you know, coming into the next day, I heard a bang, bang, bang like a wooden screen door. And I said to myself, why isn't that door locked? I mean, how come someone left the door open? And I'm on the second story of the house, and my bedroom was on the east gable. I looked through the doorway to the west, and there had been an exterior staircase. Well, there wasn't a door banging. There was an image of a man, and the image to me was dots, gray and white dots, kind of like how the early printouts from newspapers when they're sending over the telephone lines of multiple dots, but an image of a man, definitely a man. Well, I had other experiences, but not ghost experiences, and it scared me. It scared the piss out of me, to be honest. And I went directly to the bathroom. There was a bathroom on the second floor, and went into the room, began to eliminate, and as I'm looking out the window, there was that man again in the apple orchard, in the orchard, standing next to a tree. Well, that did it. You know, this was twice I saw this image that was not a person, but yes, a person. And I booked downstairs, ran into my roommate's room and said, frightened, I just saw a ghost. And my friend Jerry said, I told you so, to my other roommate, and he had experienced something strange but did not know that it was a ghost, in fact.
My wife used to tell me that. Then they go cobwebs in the face, and the people in the mirrors, and running around faces, and talking and screaming. I said, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. But it happens, one wedding over here happens that way. Two kids, they have it married over here. They went to sleep over there, 12 o'clock, and 2 o'clock, they cannot make love either. No put that. They could not make love either because the face is in the middle and running around and cobwebs in the face. And I said they got up and they went to the parents in New Orleans to sleep because they couldn't sleep over here. They couldn't. So that's what I found out. After my wife told me, that's what I found out. It's crazy, but I don't believe it anyway. I don't. It's so, Tony, you better believe. I don't find anything yet. I talk in the cemeteries, and I've been in church for a long time as an altar boy, and with the keys open the doors. And I never saw anything. Nobody bothers me. And in the war, in the revolution, I sleep in the cemeteries because that was the safety part. I never see anything. Nobody coming to me, push me, no.
So what do you think your wife was seeing?
That's what she told me. She said she faces, like this couple, married couple. They saw faces. And I asked the Jim Baker, you know, and she said, but you thinking then it's ghosts in there? And she said, oh yes, I used to. Don't bother me. So good. Because this couple, they get married, they get angry. They were angry, so angry, you know, because they were in the winter. So that's the way it is. I don't believe it's enough.
Okay. Well,
what else you want to know?
That's it. Thanks a lot. I appreciate you talking to us.
I married so many people. I did help to bury, make a holes to many people during the Spanish Revolution. Then nobody's bothering me. According to why you coconut is, you know. If you coconut dictate, that's it, that's it. If you coconut dictate, well, forget it. Nothing. Nothing. No ghosts in there.
People we were staying with that were across the street from this house knew the people well, and we went over there one day, and I went to the door, and this lady answered the door, and the guy that I was with asked for this girl, I can't remember her name, if she was home, and the lady said, sure, yeah, she's home. She's right upstairs. So we went upstairs, and we asked the girl, I guess we'll have to call her Betsy, right? Asked the girl who the lady was that answered the door, because we hadn't seen her before. And this, this guy lived there, and he had, lived across the street and never seen this lady before. And the girl goes, "What'd she look like?" So the guy describes her, what she looked like. And so she pulls out a photo album and says, "Is this her?" And the guy goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Yeah, that's her. That's the lady." And she goes, "Yeah, that's my great aunt. She's been dead for like 40 years. And sometimes she just answers the door." And she told us this phenomenal story of, because they've had, this is I guess a fairly famous house for the area. They've had psychics in there and all that stuff. And like, tons of their relatives are in the house. There's rooms where you go into and it's like you smell cigar smoke all the time because this guy smokes cigars. And it's just, and this house has that look too, with like spires on it and little catwalks and secret rooms and stuff. But that was the only other experience I ever had that really made me a believer.
People are reluctant to talk about it because they may be talking to somebody who is going either to ridicule them or think they're nuts or something like that, until somebody is outspoken enough to say, "I believe in ghosts."
I must have been about 7 or 8 years old, and we were living in Wellfleet in that, we used to call it the Costa House on the corner of Cross Street. And the rooms were arranged so that you could see from my bedroom through the living room, through the dining room, into the kitchen. And I don't know what made me one night, but I woke up and I sat up in bed and I looked out in the kitchen and I saw a man sitting at our kitchen table, the small kitchen table. And I looked at him and he looked at me, and he stood up, and my mother had her handbag on the shelf of the stove, and so he went over and picked up her handbag and fished in it. I don't believe he took anything. And he went back and sat down, and I watched this whole thing, and all of a sudden he disappeared just like that. And I told my mother about it the next day. It was an old man and a small man. And I told my mother about it the next day, and she said, "Well, there's an old man who lives upstairs in this house with his wife, and he just died that night before."
I think people are reluctant to say that they believe in ghosts, yes. We were at a gathering just a few months ago, and the subject of ghosts came up, and nobody wanted to talk about it, and they all quieted down. And I said, well, and somebody made a remark about, kind of snickered about ghosts, and I says, "Don't tell me that there is no such thing as a ghost, because I've seen one."